The morning started like any other Friday, except it wasn't just any Friday. Tomorrow was supposed to be the best day of my life. I woke up in my childhood bedroom in Manchester, surrounded by wedding gifts still wrapped in shiny paper and my dress hanging on the wardrobe door like a promise. Daniel had left me the sweetest voicemail the night before, his Yorkshire accent thick with excitement, as he rambled about how he couldn't wait to see me walk down the aisle at St. Mary's. I spent most of the morning running around with my sister Emma, picking up the flowers from the little shop on Deansgate and checking that everything was perfect for the reception at the Royal Exchange. The photographer called twice to confirm timing, and my bridesmaids were already sending pictures of their nail appointments in our WhatsApp group. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. My hair had always been my pride. Long, honey-brown waves that reached halfway down my back, the kind that strangers complimented in grocery store queues. I'd been growing it out for 3 years, picturing how it would look cascading over my shoulders in the wedding photos. That morning, I'd tied it up in a messy bun while I ran errands, but I kept catching glimpses of myself in shop windows, imagining how it would look tomorrow with Emma's grandmother's pearl hairpins. When I got home around noon, Mom was in the kitchen making tea and arranging biscuits on her best china. She'd been unusually quiet all week, which should have been my first warning. Normally, she'd be in full control mode by now, micromanaging every detail and making sure everyone knew she was the mother of the bride. But lately, she'd been watching me with this strange look in her eyes, like she was calculating something. "Come sit with me, love," she said, patting the kitchen chair beside her. "We need to talk about tomorrow." I should have known something was off. Mum never called me love, unless she wanted something. Growing up in our terraced house in Chorlton, I'd learned to read her moods like weather patterns. The false sweetness in her voice was the calm before the storm, but I was too caught up in wedding excitement to pay attention. She started talking about the ceremony, about how beautiful everything would be, how proud she was, but there was something underneath her words, something that made my stomach twist. She kept mentioning how we needed to make sure everything was just right, and how important it was that nothing overshadowed the occasion. "You know, Sarah," she said, stirring her tea slowly, "I've been thinking about your hair." The way she said it made the hairs on my arms stand up. I'd heard that tone before, usually right before she'd find some way to deflate whatever happiness I'd managed to build for myself. It was the same voice she'd used when she convinced me not to apply to university in London because it was too far from family. The same voice that had somehow managed to turn my engagement party into a showcase for her own stories about when she was young and beautiful. "What about my hair?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, nothing serious. Just want to make sure you look perfect tomorrow. After all, it's such an important day for our family." The way she said, "our family," instead of "you," sent a chill down my spine. I'd spent 28 years learning that in Mum's world, everything was about her, even when it wasn't supposed to be. But tomorrow was my wedding day. Surely she wouldn't try to make it about herself. Looking back, I realize I was naive to think that. Mum had been the center of attention for so long, she'd forgotten how to step aside, even for her own daughter's wedding. That evening, the house felt different. Dad had gone to the pub with his mates for what he called his last night of freedom from wedding chaos. And Emma was at her flat in Didsbury, probably painting her nails and watching Netflix. It was just me and Mum, and the silence between us felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I was in the living room, going through my checklist one more time and texting Daniel when she called out from the kitchen. "Sarah, love, come here for a minute." When I walked in, she was standing by the sink with this odd smile on her face, the kind that never meant anything good. She'd set up one of the kitchen chairs in the middle of the room and was holding her old hairbrush, the wooden one with the worn handle that she'd used on me when I was little. "I thought it might be nice if I brushed your hair, like old times," she said, her voice honey-sweet. "Remember how we used to do that when you were small? You'd sit right here and I'd brush it until it shone." Something about the setup felt wrong, but I couldn't put my finger on what. Maybe it was the way she was standing, or the fact that she'd moved the chair away from the table, or just the general weirdness of the whole situation. But she was looking at me expectantly, and I didn't want to start a fight the night before my wedding. "Mum, it's fine, really. I'm planning to wash it in the morning anyway." "Nonsense," she said, patting the chair. Sit down. Let me take care of you one last time before you're someone else's wife." The way she said someone else's wife made my skin crawl, but I sat down anyway. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe she genuinely wanted to have a mother-daughter moment. God knows we'd had precious few of those over the years. She started brushing gently, and for a moment, it almost felt normal. She was humming under her breath, some old song from when I was little, and the repetitive strokes of the brush were actually quite soothing. I let my eyes drift shut and tried to relax. "You know, you really do have beautiful hair," she said, running her fingers through the length of it. "So thick and shiny. I was never blessed with hair like this when I was your age." I should have heard the jealousy in her voice, but I was too tired to analyze every word. The wedding preparations had been exhausting, and I just wanted to enjoy this rare moment of peace between us. "Thanks, Mum," I murmured, leaning back slightly. That's when I heard it. The unmistakable sound of scissors opening right behind my head. My body went rigid. "Mum, what are you doing?" "Just tidying up a few split ends," she said, but her voice had changed. It was harder now, more determined. "Hold still." I felt the cold metal of the scissors against my neck, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to move, but I was frozen. This couldn't be happening. Not the night before my wedding. Not from my own mother. The first cut was about 6 inches from the nape of my neck. I felt the weight of my hair shift as a chunk fell to the floor, and I shot up from the chair so fast it nearly toppled over. "What the hell are you doing?" I spun around to face her, and she was standing there with the scissors in her hand, looking perfectly calm. At her feet was a thick section of my hair, honey brown and beautiful, lying on the kitchen tiles like something dead. "I'm helping you," she said, as if cutting off your daughter's hair without permission was the most natural thing in the world. "You can't upstage your own mother at her daughter's wedding, Sarah. That would be ridiculous." I stared at her, my hand reaching instinctively to touch the back of my head where she'd cut. The hair was choppy and uneven, shorter on one side than the other. I could feel the cool air on my neck where there should have been hair. "You cut my hair," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You actually cut my hair." "I improved it," she corrected, setting the scissors down on the counter like she'd just finished trimming roses. "Now we both look appropriate for tomorrow. No one will be confused about who the real star of the show is." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not in front of her. Not when she was looking at me with that satisfied expression, like she'd just solved a complicated puzzle. "How could you do this to me?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay calm. She shrugged, already turning away to put the scissors back in the drawer. "You'll thank me tomorrow, love. Trust me." I ran upstairs to my bedroom and locked the door behind me, my hands shaking as I turned the key. The mirror on my dresser showed me the damage, and it was worse than I'd imagined. The back of my head looked like someone had taken a weed whacker to it, with chunks missing and jagged edges where my beautiful hair used to be. I looked ridiculous. I looked broken. I sank onto my bed and finally let the tears come. Great, gulping sobs that shook my whole body as I stared at the reflection of this stranger in the mirror. Tomorrow was supposed to be my perfect day. I'd had it all planned out in my head since I was little. The dress, the flowers, the way I'd look walking down the aisle with my hair cascading over my shoulders. Now I looked like I'd been attacked by a lawnmower. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow, gorgeous." Sweet dreams. The word gorgeous made me start crying all over again. How could I walk down the aisle looking like this? How could I face all our friends and family? How could I explain to my bridesmaids that my own mother had sabotaged my wedding day? I thought about calling him, but what would I say? "Hey babe, my mom just cut off my hair because she didn't want me to look too pretty at my own wedding." It sounded insane even in my own head. Besides, he was probably out with his mates, having a few pints at the Red Lion, blissfully unaware that his bride-to-be was having a complete breakdown 12 hours before the ceremony. I tried calling Emma instead, but it went straight to voicemail. She was probably asleep already, or maybe she was out with her boyfriend. Either way, I was alone with this nightmare, and I didn't know what to do. The house was quiet now. I could hear the television downstairs, some late-night program that Mum liked to watch. She was probably sitting in her chair, drinking her tea. acting like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just destroyed her daughter's confidence the night before the most important day of her life. I kept touching the back of my head, feeling the uneven lengths and the places where she'd cut too close to my scalp. It was going to take months to grow back, maybe longer. And even then, would it ever be the same? Would I ever be able to look at myself in the mirror without remembering this moment? The worst part wasn't even the hair, though. It was the realization that this was who my mother really was. All those years of small cruelties, all the times she'd managed to make my achievements about her, all the ways she'd undermined my confidence, it had all been leading to this moment. She couldn't stand the thought of me being happy, of me being the center of attention, even at my own wedding. I remembered when I'd gotten the promotion at work last year. Instead of congratulating me, she'd spent the entire family dinner talking about how she'd been offered a similar position when she was my age, but had turned it down to focus on family. When I'd gotten engaged, she'd immediately started planning the wedding like it was her own do-over, constantly reminding me how her wedding had been so much more elegant than anything I was planning. But this was different. This was deliberate sabotage, and there was no way to spin it as anything else. I picked up my phone and Googled emergency hair salon Manchester, even though I knew it was pointless. It was past 11 at night, and no decent salon would be open. I scrolled through images of pixie cuts and short hairstyles, trying to see if there was any way to salvage this disaster. Maybe if I found someone first thing in the morning, they could even it out, make it look intentional. But deep down, I knew it didn't matter what any hairdresser could do. The damage was done, and it wasn't just to my hair. Something had broken between my mother and me tonight, something that could never be repaired. She'd shown me exactly who she was, and I'd finally seen it clearly. I curled up on my bed, still in my clothes from the day, and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow was supposed to be the beginning of my new life with Daniel, but instead, it felt like the end of something else entirely. The end of pretending that my mother loved me more than she resented me. The end of hoping that she'd ever put my happiness before her own need to be the center of attention. Outside, I could hear cars passing on the street, probably people heading home from the pub or late nights out. Normal people having normal Friday nights, while I lay here looking like I'd been through a blender, wondering how I was going to face my own wedding day. I must have dozed off at some point because I woke up to my alarm at 6 a.m, feeling like I'd been hit by a bus. For a split second, I forgot what had happened. But then I caught sight of myself in the mirror, and it all came flooding back. My hair was sticking up at odd angles, the uneven cuts even more obvious in the morning light streaming through my bedroom window. I could hear movement downstairs, Mom making breakfast, probably acting like nothing had happened. The thought of facing her made my stomach turn, but I couldn't hide in my room forever. I had a wedding to get ready for, even if I looked like I'd been through a hedge backwards. I grabbed my phone and started calling hair salons, my fingers trembling as I dialed. The first 3 weren't open yet, and the 4th one laughed when I explained my situation. "Love, you need a miracle worker, not a hairdresser," the receptionist said, not unkindly. "But try Jenna at Cutting Edge on King Street. She's done some emergency work before. Opens at 7. I threw on yesterday's clothes and crept downstairs, hoping to avoid Mum. But she was right there in the kitchen, buttering toast like it was any other Saturday morning. "Morning, love," she said without looking up. "Sleep well?" The casual way she said it, like she hadn't just destroyed my confidence 12 hours before my wedding, made something snap inside me. I walked past her without a word, grabbed my car keys from the hook by the door, and headed out. King Street was already busy with Saturday morning shoppers, but I managed to find a parking spot near the salon. Jenna turned out to be a woman in her 50s with bright purple hair and kind eyes. When I explained what had happened, she didn't ask questions, just sat me down in her chair and started examining the damage. "Right then," she said, running her fingers through what was left of my hair. "We can't put it back, but we can make you look like this was intentional. You've got good bone structure. A pixie cut might actually suit you better than all that long hair ever did." I started crying again, but this time it felt different. Not the desperate sobs from last night, but something that felt almost like relief. Jenna handed me a tissue and kept working, her scissors moving with practiced precision. "You know," she said as she worked, "sometimes the best transformations happen when we're forced into them. I've been cutting hair for 30 years, and some of my favorite results have been from situations just like this. She was right. As I watched my reflection change, I realized that the person staring back at me wasn't the victim I'd felt like last night. The short hair made my eyes look bigger, my cheekbones more defined. I looked older, more sophisticated, more like myself, somehow, than I ever had with all that long hair. "There," Jenna said, stepping back to admire her work. "What do you think?" I turned my head from side to side, taking in the sleek pixie cut that somehow made me look both elegant and rebellious. It was nothing like what I'd planned for my wedding day, but it was undeniably me. "I love it," I said, and meant it. "Good," she said, smiling, "because confidence is the best accessory you can wear, especially on your wedding day." I paid her and left a huge tip, then stopped at Boots to buy some makeup that would complement my new look. Bold earrings from a vintage shop on the northern quarter, a lipstick that was braver than anything I'd worn before. Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion, a way of taking control back from what had been done to me. When I got home, Mum was waiting in the living room, still in her dressing gown, a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. "Sarah, about last night," she started, but I cut her off. "No," I said, walking past her toward the stairs. "We're not doing this today. Today is my wedding day, and nothing you do or say is going to ruin it." She followed me upstairs, her voice getting shriller. "You can't just ignore what happened. We need to talk about this." I turned to face her at the top of the stairs, and something in my expression must have stopped her cold. "Actually, we don't," I said. "You made your choice last night. Now I'm making mine." The morning flew by in a blur of activity. Emma arrived at 9 with the bridesmaids, all of them gasping when they saw my hair, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of pity or shock, I saw something that looked almost like admiration. "Sarah, you look incredible," Emma said, reaching out to touch my hair. "It's so bold and elegant. Very Audrey Hepburn." My best friend Kate nodded enthusiastically. "Honestly, it suits you so much better than the long hair ever did. You look like a proper grown-up now, not like you're playing dress-up." Their genuine reactions helped settle the last of my nerves. We did our makeup together in my bedroom, chatting and laughing like any other wedding morning. Nobody asked what had happened or why I'd suddenly changed my entire look. They just accepted it, accepted me, and helped me feel beautiful again. The dress still fit perfectly, and with the new haircut, it looked even more sophisticated. I'd decided against the veil. It would have looked silly with the pixie cut anyway, and instead wore the pearl earrings Daniel had given me for my birthday. Simple, elegant, and entirely my choice. Dad knocked on the door at noon, looking smart in his morning suit. When he saw me, his eyes went wide. "Bloody hell, Sarah," he said, then caught himself. "Sorry, love. You just look so different. So confident." "Thanks, Dad," I said, and meant it. For the first time all weekend, I felt like myself. We were supposed to leave for the church at 12:30, but Mum still hadn't appeared. Emma went to check on her and came back looking worried. "She's not ready," she said quietly. "She's sitting in her room in her dressing gown, crying. Says she can't face going to the church." Part of me wanted to go to her, to comfort her and pretend everything was fine. But that was the old Sarah, the one who always put everyone else's feelings before her own. The new Sarah, the one with the pixie cut and the bold lipstick, had different priorities. "Then she doesn't have to come," I said. "We're leaving in 10 minutes, with or without her." Dad looked torn, but he nodded. "Your day, love. Your choice." We piled into the wedding car, a vintage Rolls-Royce that Daniel's uncle had lent us, and drove through Manchester toward St. Mary's. I felt lighter than I had in years, like I was finally free from something that had been holding me back my entire life. The church was packed with friends and family, all of them turning to watch as I walked down the aisle. I heard some gasps and whispers, but they didn't bother me. I kept my eyes on Daniel, who was standing at the altar with the biggest smile I'd ever seen. "You look absolutely stunning," he whispered when I reached him. "I mean, you always do. But today, you're glowing." The ceremony was perfect. The vicar spoke about love and commitment, about building a life together based on trust and respect. I thought about my parents' marriage, about how Mom had spent 30 years trying to control and diminish Dad, and promised myself that would never be us. Just as the vicar asked if anyone had any objections, the church doors banged open. Mum stood there, still in her dressing gown, her hair a mess, and her makeup smudged from crying. "Stop this wedding!" she called out, her voice echoing through the church. "My daughter has lost her mind. Look at her hair. She's ruined herself." The entire congregation turned to stare, but I didn't flinch. I'd been expecting this. Mum had never been able to resist making herself the center of attention, and she wouldn't let my wedding day be any different. "Mum," I said, my voice calm and clear, "this is my wedding. If you can't be here to support me, then please leave." She stood there for a moment, seeming to realize that everyone was staring at her, not me, that her dramatics had backfired, making her look unhinged while I looked composed and dignified. "You'll regret this," she said, pointing at me. "You'll regret everything you've done." "The only thing I regret," I said, "is taking so long to stand up for myself." She left then, the church doors slamming behind her. Dad started to go after her, but I caught his arm. "Let her go, Dad. She made her choice." The vicar cleared his throat and continued with the ceremony. When Daniel and I kissed as husband and wife, the applause was thunderous, not because they felt sorry for me, but because they were genuinely happy for us, because they could see that this was exactly where I was meant to be. The reception at the Royal Exchange was everything I'd dreamed it would be. People kept complimenting my hair, saying how modern and chic it looked, how it suited my personality so much better than the long style ever had. Daniel's mum, a lovely woman from Leeds who'd always been kind to me, pulled me aside during the meal. "You know, love," she said, "I've been watching you for the past 2 years, and I've never seen you look as happy as you do today. Whatever happened to make you change your hair, it's brought out something in you that was always there but hidden." She was right. I felt like myself for the first time in years. Not the version of myself that I'd been trying to be to please Mum, but the real me. The one who could make decisions without second-guessing herself, who could stand up for what she believed in, who could be happy without feeling guilty about it. Dad gave a speech during the toasts, and he managed to keep it focused on me and Daniel, without mentioning Mum's absence. A few people asked where she was, but most seemed to understand that family dynamics were complicated and left it alone. We danced until midnight, and I felt beautiful in a way I never had before, not because of how I looked, but because of who I was becoming. The short hair felt like a declaration of independence, and every time I caught sight of myself in the mirror, I smiled. Daniel and I spent our honeymoon in the Cotswolds, walking through villages and talking about our future. He never pushed me to explain what had happened with Mum, just listened when I was ready to talk, and held me when I needed comfort. On our last night, as we sat in the garden of our bed and breakfast, he took my hand. "I need you to know something," he said. "I've loved you since the day we met, but I've never been more proud to be your husband than I was watching you handle your mum at the wedding. You were incredible." When we got back to Manchester, there were 17 missed calls from Mum on my phone, and a string of text messages that ranged from apologetic to furious to manipulative. I deleted them all without reading most of them, then blocked her number. It wasn't an easy decision, but it was necessary. I'd spent 28 years trying to manage her emotions, trying to be small enough that she wouldn't feel threatened, trying to be the perfect daughter for someone who would never be satisfied. I was done. Emma supported my decision, though she admitted it was hard for her too. "She's been calling me nonstop," she said over coffee at our favorite cafe in Didsbury, "wanting me to talk to you, to convince you to forgive her. But honestly, Sarah, I think you're doing the right thing. I've watched her treat you like rubbish for years, and I should have said something sooner." Dad was more conflicted, but he understood. "Your mum's always been jealous of you," he admitted during one of our Sunday phone calls. "Even when you were little, she'd get upset when people complimented you. I thought she'd grow out of it, but she never did. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Patterson who specialized in family trauma. It was hard work, unpacking years of emotional manipulation and learning to trust my own instincts. But with each session, I felt stronger, more confident in my decisions. The best part was watching how my marriage flourished without Mum's constant interference. Daniel and I could make plans without worrying about her opinions, could enjoy our successes without her finding ways to diminish them. We bought a house in Chorlton, not far from where I'd grown up, and started talking about having children. "Do you think you'll ever speak to her again?" Daniel asked one evening as we painted the spare bedroom. I considered it. Really considered it. "Maybe," I said finally. "But not until she can acknowledge what she did and why it was wrong. And honestly, I don't think she's capable of that." A year later, I still kept my hair short. People often asked if I missed the long hair, but I never did. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw the woman who'd found her strength on the worst day of her life and decided to keep it. I heard through Emma that Mom had started telling people that I'd had a nervous breakdown, that the stress of the wedding had made me do something drastic to my hair. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to make herself the victim of my choices. But it didn't matter anymore. I'd built a life that was entirely my own, surrounded by people who loved and supported me. I was free, finally, and completely free, and nothing she could say or do would change that. The scissors that had cut my hair had also cut the chains that had bound me to her dysfunction, and for that, I was grateful.